Thanks, Nick.
Great. So there's my email. If anybody wants to email me afterwards, that's fine. So, and basically, I coordinate something called the Developing Evidence Enriched Practice Program. And in a nutshell, it's a co-production approach to gathering, exploring, and using diverse types of evidence in learning and development using story and dialogue methods. And MSc is one of our deep methods. So there are other methods you might be interested in, but they primarily focused around how do we gather stories, whether it's stories of change, as is mostly been change, or stories of experience, which isn't always about change. And then how do we engage in dialogue and really get meaningful learning through engagement with stories. And most significant change is a storytelling approach to evaluation, but it's much more, as you'll see as we go through the slides, it's much more than an evaluation methodology. So how do we usually measure things? And usually this word precision comes in, doesn't it? It's like accuracy is precision, and it's like if you're a carpenter, if you get your millimeters out, it all goes wonky and everything. I'm very impractical. That's why I became a social worker. But it's there's this idea of precision and like Likert scales, and we put everything to numbers, and there's a place for that. I'm not saying there isn't, but there's a guy called William Bruce Cameron, a famous quote from him: "Not everything that can be counted counts, and not everything that counts can be counted." So and we know that, don't we? When we work with human beings, you can't always put numbers on things. You can't score your friends on a Likert scale. Or your mother-in-law, is she on a 3 or a 2? It doesn't go. So there are things you can't measure with numbers. So I wanted to introduce you to Luigi. Luigi's a little Italian boy, and he comes from a disadvantaged district in an Italian city. And basically in Italy, they have 3-month holidays, summer holidays, which is great for kids from wealthy families because they go to museums and they go on holiday and they do well. But in the kids from lesser, more disadvantaged backgrounds tend to go backwards in their education. So one thing they wanted to do in Italy, they said, well, we need to make sure the kids don't go backwards over the summer holiday. So we'll put a summer support scheme in, an educational support scheme. And so they did that. And Luigi was one of the kids that was involved in it, really. So how do you get a measure the difference the summer educational support scheme has made to Luigi? And the first thing is you think, well, it's educational, so we'll do a test. And we can do a maths test, can't we? We could do a maths test on Luigi. And he got 73%, so that's really good. And we did an English test and 63%, so he's still doing well. So you could say, oh, it's a really good summer scheme and his education's doing well. But isn't it different if you put the question to Luigi, what good or bad changes happened for you, Luigi, as a result of being on the summer scheme, really? So, and I want to share a little MSc story that shows you how simple MSc stories can be. This is a child's MSc story, but when you hear what changes Luigi said, it adds a richness which the numbers will never touch. So here's his story, and he calls his story "Learning Can Be Fun." My most important changes are that now I feel more calm and I'm having fun and I'm more curious. I got better at maths. When lots of time goes by a lot, I forget things, but here I remembered maths because we did maths games. Without having fun, there's no point. So for me, that's the most important change. If I learn things whilst having fun, I remember things more and I enjoy learning them. Educators help me understand that when you get angry, you shouldn't hit your friends. When you get angry at someone, you should tell the teacher instead of using your hands. In this drawing, I show that I like playing dominoes. It's nice, and we can play it with the group. It's a beautiful little story, isn't it? You can see Luigi, can't you? You can feel Luigi, and those are really important things. And what the research was done by Gina Montano. She interviewed lots of children who are on the course, and they all came up with very personalised stories. They were all completely unique little stories, but they gave a richness to the evaluation that it would never have come from just the basic scoring and standardized tests. So that's just to show you how simple a little MSc story can be. But when we measure what difference we're making to people's lives, and that's what social services is about, isn't it? It's not even sort of getting people's maths and literacy skills up. It's about helping people develop as persons and family relationships, and it's really complex. So how do we get a measure of what difference we're making in complex lives and complex family work? And I want to give you a quote for a guy I always point people to. If you want a hero, here's a lovely hero working with young, demonized, marginalized gang members in Los Angeles. His name's Greg Boyle, and he runs Homeboy Industries, which is one of the most successful and largest drug and alcohol rehab programs in the world, really. And he's got a medal from Joe Biden and all sorts of stuff. But this is a lovely quote. He's famous for his stories, is Greg Boyle, transformative stories. But this is a quote from him. Homeboy receives people. He doesn't rescue them. In being received rather than rescued, gang members come to find themselves at home in their own skins. Homeboy's message is not you can measure up someday. Rather, it is who you are is enough. And when you have enough, you have plenty. It's a beautiful quote, isn't it, really? But how do you get a measure of that? So that lad there, who's been in and out of prison, who's had a history of drug and alcohol, how do you measure what difference Homeboy is making to his life, really? So, and one of the ways people have tried to do it in sort of drug and alcohol rehab is to do an outcome star. You take someone's life and you dissect it. So you have self-care and living skills and social networks, and you say, John, where are your living skills today? Are you a 2 or a 3? And I'm not saying there isn't a place for these, but they're really clunky. And my general experience, and when I talk to people honestly about them, they don't like them really, because you're trying to take a unique life like Luigi's and then try to standardize it against a standard measure. And it's a bit like the Bayeux Tapestry. I always think when you look at the Bayeux Tapestry, you've got a picture, haven't you? You can see Harold with the arrow in his eye and people falling, and you can read the Bayeux Tapestry. But if you pull all of the threads out of the Bayeux Tapestry, you end up with just various shades of brown wool, really. And that's a real danger when we try to dissect people's lives, which are complex, and try to put them into standardized measures. So I really think that there might be a place to get conversation going with outcome stars, but they don't capture what difference we're making to people, because people are unique. So should we listen to people's stories? And the first the more sort of full MSc story I want to read to you is called The Biggest Change Belief. This is from Recovery Cymru, who have been using most significant change in peer-led drug and alcohol rehab. But again, just listen to the story and you'll see what's going on in this person's life. For most of my life, I didn't trust people. I thought everyone had an ulterior motive, that they wanted something from me, that they'd hurt me if I let them. That was just how I'd learned to survive. I was in and out of systems from the moment I was born: family services, the courts, alcohol and drug services, housing. I was a heroin addict at 13, in and out of prison, in and out of services. I used to say, I'll never do volunteering. Why would you do something for free? Then in 2017, I got out of jail. The same day I overdosed. I hadn't engaged with services for a decade, but I knew I was going to die if I didn't change something. That's when I saw an old friend, someone I'd last seen smoking drugs in Cardiff prison, but now he was clean, doing well, actually happy. I looked at him and thought, I want that. So I started volunteering. I threw myself into peer work, giving 40 hours a week to Cavdas. They trusted me. You know what you're doing, don't fuck it up. And people stuck their necks out for me, saying, he's good, he's growing. But I avoided getting a job for a long time. I didn't think I could do it. When a job came up, my mentor told me it was perfect for me. I listed all the reasons I couldn't apply. And he just said, we all feel like that. Every day we come to work, we feel like that. It's called imposter syndrome. I ignored the application for weeks. Then last minute, I sat down, filled it out and sent it off. I got the job. And I thought, right, everything's going to change now. And it did. I now work for the Hep C Trust. I'm learning things I never thought I'd learn: how to manage money, how to have a bank account, how to live a normal life. I've never had stability before. Now I don't have to worry about someone screwing me over. But the biggest change for me, it's belief. For the first time in my life, I believe in people. I don't assume the worst anymore. I've built friendships with people I trust completely. I've seen people come through services broken and come out on the other side. I've supported people who, though they thought they had no future, and now they're back in work, back in their families, actually living again. Peer support showed me that people want to get better. They just need the chance, the space, someone to believe in them. And that's what's changed for me. Someone believed in me, and now I get to do that for others. It's fantastic, isn't it? Yeah. And they've got a set, if you go on the Recovery Cymru website, they've got 24 stories like that, which are fantastic. That they use them to demonstrate what difference they're making to their funders and the commissioners, but they also use them to get conversations going about what is good drug and alcohol rehab, what are the features. So the stories spark a conversation. That's what MSc is about. It gathers the stories which provide qualitative data. But the important thing is, how do we talk and learn together from the stories? What's it telling us about the way we need to run services? So we looked at how do we measure, and we're saying stories have a place alongside numbers. So the MSc isn't a standalone methodology. Why do we want to measure things? And this is important to bear in mind. So the first one is for proving. That's usually what, when I was a social worker, you had to record, because if you didn't record it, it wasn't done. And so it's all about proving what you've done, really. And that's performance focused. And there's a place for that. And stories can help that. But there's also improving, which is just a slight tweak of the word, but it's putting the im in front of the proving. And that's more learning focused. And that's really important thing, because MSc leans towards a more learning focused approach. It does gather stories. And some people say, well, I'll just gather the stories and I'll put them in a box. And then when the inspectorate come around, we can show them the stories. And you can do that, but that's not MSc. MSc says, no, you've got to engage with the stories. And you might be moved by the stories. You've got to be more than moved. You've got to learn from them and think and change, act differently. And stories are really powerful in learning. And there's a couple of quotes here. There's one from a writer, Jonathan Gottschall. We are a species addicted to story. Even when the body goes to sleep, the mind stays up all night telling itself stories. It's how we make sense of the world. Or Terry Pratchett, the author here. People think that stories are shaped by people. In fact, it's the other way around. So if you want pennies to drop, if you want people to learn, human beings learn best through story. And I found that with frontline care workers, even in care homes and home care, where they don't like and they almost resist all the jargon and the research, lots of papers and so on. But when you share a story, you're in and they understand the story, they can interpret the story, and they're very sophisticated story analysts, because human beings are naturally storytellers, really. So if you want to get a complex, nuanced subject across, do it through story. And stories are powerful because they engage our heads and our hearts. And they're real life, aren't they? You get so much abstract things about positive risk taking and outcome focused practice, which is all full of jargon, really. But the stories are real and people can connect with them. And I like this quote from Carl Rogers, who's the founder of person centered counseling. That which is most personal is most universal. Because some people criticize stories, they're a bit anecdotal, aren't they? But they're a bit subjective, as if because of that, the people can't really make sense of them. But no, they have often unique stories contain universal truths, really, which people can connect with. So, and stories bring things to life. So just to give you an example of the power of story, this is from Older People's Services. We were doing a project with Joseph Rowntree Foundation around getting a better life, what matters most to older people with high support needs. So the research message was, often it's the simple things that can bring the most pleasure, and the lack of them can bring a sense of sadness and loss. And services do not always seem to be very good at delivering the ordinary. So you could go along to a care home and say, you've got to focus on the little things. These little things are really important. And they go, oh, right, okay. And it would go in one ear and out the other. But Carol, you see here, had a story that illustrated it. She said, I've got a story that sums that up nicely, I think. She said, I'm living in this nursing home and I'm existing. She said, when I was living in the community in Abergavenny, I was disabled and I couldn't do a lot, but I had a life. And on a Friday, I used to get a taxi and it would take me down to Waitrose and I'd treat myself to a Hester Blumenthal prawn cocktail. It was my little Friday treat. And she says, now I'm in the nursing home, I don't get my prawn cocktail. So we shared that with the staff. And the staff are going, oh no. They're moved by it. They said, well, didn't know she liked prawn cocktail. They get into a conversation with her and they get her a mini fridge. And she has prawn cocktail on a Friday, roller dessert on a Thursday, and a bit of Prosecco and a Prost cheese at the weekend. And it was a little thing, but it was the story that triggered the interest and got the staff to think differently about Carol, not the standardized bullet point. So stories are really powerful, but the next thing is that we need to talk well about stories. So you don't just, when we do an MSc, we have what they call a story selection panel. It's not just a chit chat about the stories. It's a very structured dialogue around the stories. And it is important that we speak well. And the people who've helped us with this are the academics in Cambridge University who are into dialogue and and oracy skills in children, really, and how people can express themselves and talk with others and get on with others and perhaps change their mind when they listen to other people. And they tell us there are three ways that people talk in groups. So the first is disputational talk, like the House of Commons. Everyone's got closed minds and people just argue and they just try to browbeat each other. And they say nobody learns in disputational talk. So you don't want that kind of conversation about the stories. Cumulative talk is where you don't say what you really think. So you might be nodding and Pauline's saying something, you're very good, Pauline, and then you walk out and say, what was she on about? Well, she doesn't know what she's talking. People don't say what they really think. And there's lots of reasons people don't do that. It can be they've got their introverts. So you might have a group of people with an introvert and they just don't get a look in because all the extroverts are talking. It might be people have the imposter syndrome, which is really common, where you think, oh, I better not say anything because people might laugh at me. I might look stupid. It can be that I might get it in the neck syndrome. Why did you say that in front of health services? You shouldn't have said that. Or it could be that the British thing, we don't like to upset. So Neve's such a lovely person. I didn't agree with her. I didn't want to hurt her feelings, so I didn't say anything. And that's called cumulative talk. And we don't want that because nobody learns from that. So when we get story selection panels, which we'll go through in a minute, we want a thing called exploratory talk. And this means when you get a group of people, an MSc panel might have the director of social services, it might have somebody from housing, it might have somebody from health, education, it might have a parent, it might have a young person. It doesn't matter who they are, they're precious and they've got a voice, and we want to hear everybody's point of view. And there might be different points of view. And you can say anything you like in exploratory talk, but you've got to give a reason why you think it. So you can say, I think the moon's made out of cheese, but in exploratory talk, you can't say that, you see. So I think the moon's made out of cheese because I saw a film about a man and a dog and they built a rocket and they took crackers to the moon and they cut off these cones of cheese and they ate it. And you see, and then other people can't rubbish that and say, well, that's stupid. Of course, the moon's not made out of cheese. They've got to engage dialogically with me. So they might say, well, Nick, I agree with you. Neve might say, well, Nick, I agree with you because I've seen that. And it's a series of films. And there's another one where they're talking about Wensleydale cheese. So I think you'll find the moon's probably made out of Wensleydale cheese. Pauline might say, hang on, guys, I want to disagree with you if that's okay. Because I disagree with you because I've seen both of those films and they're not documentaries. They're animated cartoons by Nick Park, and one's called A Grand Day Out. They're Wallace and Gromit stories. So she's very kindly and gently challenged. And it's this idea that you can, and you build on each other. So you test. So in Most Significant Change, when we look at the stories, you'll have a selection of, say, 6 stories. You're given a simple task of which is the most significant story. And Neve will say, well, I think this is obviously the most significant story. And Pauline will say, well, no, I think this is a more significant story because, and then you're into the dialogue. So it's this exploratory talk. So they're fun things to be in the story section panels. People say that's the nicest bit because we sit down and we explore the stories and then we have a gentle argument around what's significant in the stories and which is the most significant thing. Well, what is the most? So it's as simple as that, really, but it's very structured using these exploratory talk. And I like this quote from one of the academics who's helped us, Rupert Hyam, who's at UCL now. But he said, dialogue, it's more than talking. It's responding to others because they really matter. And it's building dispositions to seek out value and learn from the differences between us. So a classic example of this was a story selection panel where we had 6 stories and we had the director, Andrew Jarrod, who's the director of Neath Port Talbot Social Services. And he was stood by a particular story and he told us why he thought it was the most significant story. And there was a parent who'd had kids taken off her in the past. And anyway, she was stood on a different story. And she said why she thought this was the most significant story. And it was interesting. Andrew was listening to what she was saying. And he said, well, I'd never seen it from that perspective before. And actually, I think you're right. And so he moved then, he walked over and he stood by her story and he said, no, I think this is the most significant story. So there was that lovely negotiation, and it's like trying to see everybody's eyes, really. And we use this elephant metaphor of reality. So here's a story selection panel. The story is the elephant. Each person will be seeing different things. So this is an old Indian fable about 6 blind people around an elephant. So the person at the back's holding the tail and goes, it's a rope. And the person at the front says, rubbish. It's not a rope, it's a tusk, because they're a spear, because they're holding the tusk. The person touching the side says, no, you're both wrong. It's a wall. And you can see that in the fable, they all fall out and squabble and fight. But if they can see each other's perspectives, they see the bigger picture in the room, the elephant. And that's what co-production is all about, or interprofessional work in. It's about seeing multiple perspectives. and really understanding complex issues and complex lives. That's what MSc does. So if you've got any comments or questions, we haven't got time to do them straight away, but do put them in the chat if that's okay. If you want to think for a minute and put a question, or should we have just a little rest and
Yeah, we can do. Shall I? Because I can pause. I can stop the recording and we can fire it back up.
It's just if people want to write any questions. If they don't, I can carry on. But
that's a good point. Yeah, we'll see. If any hands go up or if people want to ask questions at this point, please do.
No. Shall we go into the structure? Because it is simple, and we'll have more time to talk then at the end.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks, Nick.
Okay, so the MSc process, this is just, and it is really simple. So it's not, you get there's a guy called Dave Snowden who does a thing called Sense Maker, which I can't make sense of really. It's quite technical, and you get that sometimes in evaluation, even things like realist evaluation. It's very robust and very good for researchers, but it goes over the heads of most people. But this is a very simple, logical process really, so it shouldn't take long to go through. And it is a 3-stage cycle, and it is an action learning cycle, really. So it starts by gathering stories, and I'll go into those in, what do we mean? How do we structure the stories? But basically, we go to can be any stakeholder, say what's changed as a result of something. It could be a new way of working, it could be new paperwork, a new form, new IT system. It could be that you've done some interventions in a family's life. Somebody could be attending a family centre or whatever, and so it's something's happened and you want to know what's changed for people. So you gather stories of change, and then you can use those as qualitative data, as I've said, but then we have these story selection panels, which again, I'll go through each of these in turn. And the story selection panels are where we talk, are like the 6 blind people around an elephant, and we try to explore what's significant in the stories. And then when we've learned from the stories, we need to say, well, what are we going to do? So we provide feedback. So the panels always provide a feedback report, not a long thing, a very short report. And we'll go through each of these in turn. But what we found in this dialogic cycle of gathering stories, listening to people attentively, exploring and learning from stories, and then feeding back what you've learned, so people to the storytellers, you get 4 key benefits. And Michael Gray, who's the director of social service in Pembrokeshire, has done a PhD on this. It can be therapeutic, and it's in inverted commas because it's not therapy. You don't see evaluation as therapeutic, but it is. I was with Sally Holland, who was the Children's Commissioner for Wales for a number of years, and we were working with young homeless kids and telling their story. That it was an intervention in itself. They were invited to say, you've been involved in End Youth Homelessness Cymru. What good or bad changes have come about as a result of that? And the ball was in their court. They weren't being told to fill in a form at a well-being scale or a Likert scale. They were being asked to share their story, and that can be therapeutic. And we found it particularly powerful for people who've been marginalised or disadvantaged. So parents who are frightened of social services because they've taken kids off them and feel like they're life's losers, really, to gently invite them to say, well, we've been working with you the last 6 months. What good or bad changes have happened? It's empowering and it makes them feel good because they're heard. And it's the same with social workers. If you get mostly for changes from a practitioner really as well. And instead of having to fill in the usual evaluation form, they're invited to share their story. It might be a story of training they've been on and what difference. So it's got this therapeutic quality. It captures complex outcomes because stories can capture things that are hard to put into numbers really, because human lives are complex and the human organizations and partnerships are complex. So it can be organizational developments, and you can have organizational stories, or you can have family stories. So it captures complexity. It supports individual and collective learning, because when you gather the stories, you ask people to reflect on what's significant in their stories. So they don't just tell you their story, they have to reflect what's significant in their stories. So people reflect on their stories, which often they've never had time to do. And then in the story selection panels, people reflect also. And it supports individual learning and collect. So it does individual and collective learning. And lastly, it builds relationships and mutual understanding. And this is really important aspect of MSc. There's an academic in Oxford University called Anne Edwards who researches interprofessional working. And she says one of the most important things you need is what she calls common knowledge. And that's when you get a group of people, it's understanding where other people are coming from. So Pauline might pick a story and say, Pauline, and we say to Pauline, why have you picked this story? What's significant in the story, Pauline? She'll analyze the story, and we're learning from the analysis about the story, but we're also learning about Pauline, because when she says this is the most significant, I think she's saying something about herself. So you know that what's important to Pauline, and that's called common knowledge then. So if we're going to work with Pauline, you need to bear that in mind, because that'll resonate with her. So you'd learn as much about each other as you do about the stories. Does that make sense? So it's almost a two-pronged thing. You learn from the stories, but you learn about each other and where you're all coming from, and you start to move towards a sort of consensus. So it has these 4 benefits, but it isn't standalone, and it complements metrics. So I was saying Neath Port Talbot, they've done a lot of work with Andy Bilson, looking at data with the kids, looked after getting kids taken into care, and they've combined the storytelling with the data. So it is important to bear that in mind. And that's it really. So just quickly to go through gathering a story, because they have a bit of structure. Because again, years ago, I was when I worked for Powys County Council, you'd have these days where you'd get people, they call them service users. I don't like the phrase really, but you get service users along and ask them their opinion. And then you'd get this catalogue, it would be poured out, often of complaints, and there wasn't any structure to it. It was a bit overwhelming and you can't really do anything with it. But MSC structures stories so it makes it easier to engage with them. So they're not just tell us your story, they follow a structured approach. So first thing is the sensitivity, and there's obviously all these sort of ethical considerations when you're asking people to share their stories, because it's not like just asking people to tick boxes. You're asking for really personal data, aren't you, really? So what we do, and I can send you examples of this, we have an information sheet. So if we're doing a story gathering, we tell people what we're doing with the stories, and they're going to go to a panel and they're going to talk. And so they need to understand the process and how they might be used. And most people are happy to share their stories if they think it's going to make a difference to someone else. So there's all this ethical consideration of us. So explain the MSc process to people, and then check if they give the consent for the story to be shared. Are you happy to share this story? They might say, well, yes, you can share it in social services, but I don't want my doctor knowing it. So you give power to the people to control their story. So the stories always belong to the people who tell them. Even once you've got them on your paper or whatever, the ones I share, I always have to get permission. So ones I use in training, I've got permission from them to use them in training. You check if some people want to be anonymous. Some people do, and some people don't. And we found that again in research. We're very particular about making everything anonymous. But some people say, nobody's heard my voice for years, so I want my name on the front cover, please. And that's fine. But it's for them to decide, really. So. And then if the stories include third parties, you make sure there's a bit of sensitivity. So there was a case in Scotland where they were doing it around end of life care, and there was some negative feedback about the GPs. They said, can we put that in the story? I said, as long as you don't swear about the GP, you can say I had difficulties with the GP. We don't sort of say anything personal or horrible about the GPs. So just a bit of sensitivity. And then again, if you gather the stories, so Blackpool might gather some stories and say, there's some cracking stories here. And this really illustrates the way we want to work. Or this illustrates, Neath were very good because they were very brave. They said, this illustrates exactly how we don't want to work. So they had some bad stories as well as good stories, because you can have both. Yeah. But if you use them for training or putting in a council newsletter, you've got to get permission. So I labour that because that is really important. And then you need to set the scene. So what we do is you gather a bit of a pen picture about the person. Who is this? Because the panel might not know. You might know the people you're gathering stories from, but the panel won't. Yeah, and so then this is a young man who's lived in residential care for the last 4 years. He's had 3 foster breakdowns, whatever. So you get a bit of a pen picture about the person. And then you ask them this question, okay, looking back over the last, usually 6 months is what we say, looking back over the last 6 months, what good or bad changes have come about as a result of your involvement with social services? Or it might be, what's a good or bad change that come about as a result of the course, the course that we put up for you. So you let people identify good and bad changes, and it can often be a mix. You can shape this question. So if you're only interested in building relationships, say you're a funder and your funder says, we want you to build community relationships. You could shape your question like, looking back over the last 6 months, what good or bad changes have come about as a result of your relationships as a result of? So you can shape your question, but the more open the question, the more likely you are to get unexpected answers, because people will speak from their own hearts, really. And you can explore all sorts of changes. So it can be changes for an individual. So it might be physical, psychological, social, financial, attitudinal. It can be anything, really. It can be changes in other people. It can be family members, work colleagues, changes in a group or a community. It can be changes in organizational policies and procedures. The important thing is you're teasing out from people what's changed. So if it's a social work, you might say, well, the IT system's changed. We're using magic notes now, and that's something very positive. But then the demand, what's changed is the number of referrals has gone through the roof and whatever. So you might have a mix of different changes. So you'll get different lists of changes. And then you say to people, okay, you've listed these changes. You might have listed 5 changes. Out of all of those changes, which is the most significant to you, and why is that? And that's where people say, well, I don't know, I've never thought about that. Nobody's asked me that. You say, well, have a think. So you said something about your son, you said about yourself, you said about the doctor, which is the most significant to you? And they go, oh, well, I suppose it's that, isn't it? And it's because of that. So you get this really personal narrative. So you say, that's the most significant change to me, and it's because of this. So, and then you say, okay, regarding this most significant change, can you tell me a bit about what it was like before? And tell me a bit about what it's like now. And once they've done this, say, and what do you think brought about the change? So there's a danger with stories that we take stories, and case studies are very good at this. You'll do a story, but it's your story, it's not their story. And you'll interpret it and you'll say, this is the most significant thing. But it might not be to the person. So we always say case studies are third-person stories about people. MSc stories are first-person stories by people. So the ball's always in their court. So you might think, I'm a social worker, so I might think, well, it's the social work I did that's made the change. And when you actually listen to the person, they say, well, no, it isn't. It wasn't that. I mean, you were very nice and friendly, but I was down the pub. And Jim said to me next door, we were having a pint, and he said something. I thought, you're right. And it was a moment of, so you get the story from the person. So it is really important. We say MSc stories are always by people, not about people. And you finish off with a snappy title. So always saying this is important because it's respectful of stories. All good stories have a snappy title. And also it helps because what we do is we get them to have a title and then pick a picture and to illustrate it. And when you get the story selection panel, if you've got an illustrated story with a title, it's easier for the panel to say, is that the one about the dog? Or is that the one about Asda's, Starbucks or something? So they help illustrate, and that is it. And you can capture MSc stories. You can do interviews in pairs and use a voice recorder or your phone. Or you can do it, and we found this really powerful as a group activity. So the parents who are involved in safeguarding, they formed an parent advocacy network, and we got them around a table, 3 social workers, 7 parents, and they took it in turns to ask each other the MSc questions. And they had a voice recorder sat on the table. And of course, now with Microsoft Word now, and if you've got Magic Notes, you can just instantly transcribe a recording into a Word document. It's really easy. You just go on the sort of where it says dictate or something in the toolbar, you've got an option for transcribe, and it just puts it into Word. So and you just have to tweak and tidy it up a bit because people don't give you straight, simple stories. Some people can write their own stories, and you could send out a template question and say, fill these, if it's your social work team and you haven't got time to talk with them. But again, you miss out on all that lovely listening to people. You can do it as a form filling exercise, but they're always in the storyteller's own words. That's really important. And Word does transcribe. I found it really quick to do stories now. You just pop it in and you can. So it doesn't have to be that onerous, because that was one of the things to start with. Is who's recording it and who's writing it up and how long has it taken. So I just wanted to share a story, and then we might stop then for a bit because the panel I can talk. I've sort of talked through the panel. I can talk through that more simply, really. But this is from the Parent Advocacy Network. So if you want to look at a lovely bit of work in Children and Family Services that came out of Neath Port Talbot, who were the worst local authority in Wales for taking kids into care. And they were also right high on the list across the UK. And as part of the work, they wanted to reduce the numbers. They said we'll be more positive and strengths-based with families. So they put some allocated social worker from Andrews of Swansea, it was, and from Neath Port Talbot, to work with families and bring them together to start to form a peer support group. And it's called Pan Cymru Parent Advocacy Network. And you can look at their website, and they've got some of the stories on the website. So I might stop sharing then. Yeah, I just read you the story.